Okay.
Hi, my name is Autum Romano. I'm a massage therapist, a Reiki master, safe and sound protocol provider, and homeschool mom. And I'm delighted to be a part of the SoulSpark Summit series. And it has been so much fun to get to know Dr. Theresa Newsom, and we've had a lot of time collaborating for this presentation. So I'm really grateful to be here.
And hi, I'm Dr. Theresa Newsom, and I am thrilled to be here also. I am the CEO of Children with Promise Educational Services. I'm also a gifted and talented teacher in Colorado Springs. And today we're going to be sharing with you some exciting information. And I hope that not only do you connect with it, but also that it's useful in your practice as a parent or as a teacher or an educator or whatever you do in your life, that we give you some ideas that can be helpful to you and to your child or to your student or to a family member. So sit back and relax, and we're gonna start with a screen share. So give us just a sec and we're gonna move forward. All right. So Autumn, you wanna go ahead and introduce what we're doing?
Yes, wonderful. So we have the title for our presentation as Polyvagal Theory, Trauma-Informed Care, and Leadership Development to Build Self-Efficacy. So I kind of come from the polyvagal trauma-informed care aspect, and Dr. Theresa Newsom, she is doing the leadership development to build self-efficacy, and we're going to show you how we found the bridge between these two subjects so that we can better serve our children.
And as we share our information, you might want to take notes. You might want to just sit back and just relax and just absorb everything. But the main thing is we want you to just think about how two ideas that seem to be very divergent, they seem to be opposites. How does leadership tie into self-informed care? How does leadership tie into the polyvagal theory? When I first thought about that, I said, I have no idea. But Autumn has given me so much good information. We made this connection, and again, it's something to think about, something to help our students realize that when we develop their attributes in leadership, the world is theirs. They can become so much more because they have learned to take ownership, to be self-aware, and to be intentional in their learning. So Autumn, can you go ahead and share about the theory and get us started on the information?
Yes, thank you so much, Theresa. Okay, so we're going to begin with our bodies because that's where I always begin. So go ahead and hold up a hand, everybody. We're all going to do this together. So you kind of squeeze your hand. You want more pressure than just skin. So you are kind of massaging your hand, and you're just going to go in a circle. I'll tell you when to switch directions. So when I'm talking about body wisdom, what I'm talking about is how our vagus nerve impacts our whole life. So the vagus nerve is the largest cranial nerve in our body. It's the 10th cranial nerve. It comes out of the base of the spine, comes into our face, into our vocal cord, down into our lungs and our diaphragm, our vital organs, and all the way into our gut. So when we're talking about that gut feeling, we're talking about the vagus nerve. It's also called the wanderer. And Resma Menakem, in his book, My Grandmother's Hands, calls it the soul nerve, which I love. That's my new favorite nickname. So our soul nerve, what it does is interprets our environment for us and then tells us if we feel safe or not. So there's 3 autonomic nervous states. And in my book, my children's book, I use colors. So green, red, and blue. Most of us are familiar with the red state. That's what we call fight or flight. So when you or your child, somebody is in this red state, they are going to have like tension in their muscles. They're going to have a tighter voice. So they're kind of going to sound like this, and they might talk really fast, and you can tell that they're breathing too often and they really want some air. Now, the blue zone is often what we're not always familiar with. It's a real shutdown state. So again, the voice will change and the voice will get very low. It will get really flat. You hear this a lot with autism. So they'll turn away from you. You won't get a lot of eye contact, and they'll even turn away this much. So keep rubbing. Oh, you can switch directions. So the blue state, especially in a classroom, these kids don't seem problematic because they're compliant. Whereas in that red state, they're usually not compliant. This is a kid that's like not doing what you want them to do. So in that blue state, it can seem okay because of the compliance, but they're not engaged. They're really shut down. And this blue state is also a part of depression. It's a real withdrawal from the world. It feels very isolating and numb. So we want to, when we can learn about the polyvagal theory, so how the vagus nerve works in the environment is the polyvagal theory, and how this informs our relationships and our tone of voice and if we're making eye contact. All of this has to do with the vagus nerve. So the green zone is how I feel right now when Theresa and I are talking back and forth, and you can see I'm making a lot of eye contact. There's a lot going on in the upper part of my forehead. My voice is going to go up and down, and I'm very engaged, and I'm going to have a lot of prosody in my voice. My voice is going to go up and down. Now, when everything is going good, that's green zone. So as a parent, if your kid is doing anything, maybe they're having like a full-on meltdown or something crazy is happening, and you're like, oh, I can see they're struggling, you're in the green zone. So it doesn't mean everything's perfect in your environment. It means everything's perfect right here in this environment, in your body. So the polyvagal theory helps us understand behavior. So once we can start to kind of look at those different zones, and then we can start to understand behavior, and we can see where the kids are at, which is just so helpful. Because if somebody's in that blue zone, they're not going to be able to engage with you and connect with you, and they need to be helped out of that with your nervous system, which is a process we call co-regulation. And the way that this vagus nerve works is we think about our brain always informing our body, but our body also informs our brain. So there's 80% of the nerve endings in the vagus nerve are afferent, which means they're collecting information from the environment. So those endings are picking up the information, giving it to your brain, which is informing your behavior, informing your body without your opinion. This is all unconscious. We're not in charge of this at all. And it's happening all the time. This is called neuroception, this scanning the environment and then responding to it. That's neuroception. So how does this tie into trauma-informed care? And why is trauma-informed care so vital? It's because connection is the foundation of our work. And whether we're clinicians, oh, I forgot, go ahead and switch hands. Whether you're a clinician, an educator, or a parent, all of your work begins inside of relationships. They're the foundation of what we do. And connection blooms from this relational safety. So when I talk about the soul nerve, the vagus nerve, it's our body's ability to have this innate unconscious wisdom that is always asking, am I safe with you? And if the answer is yes, then connection will follow. And when there's connection, then you have a platform for success. So like in a classroom, when there's connection, boom, you can go. So a component of being trauma-informed, go ahead and switch directions. A component of being trauma-informed is understanding that each individual has a history that's carried inside of their body, and you do too. All of us do. So trauma is carried in our genes. It's carried in our bones. It's carried in our flesh. And we're carrying our ancestors' unprocessed trauma as well as our own. And the next layer of trauma includes our life experiences, what's happened to us. 25 years ago, the CDC teamed up with Kaiser and they conducted the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And what they found out was that the difficult aspects of children's life impacted negatively their health and their social health, their entire lifespan, all the way up through and until death. So there's also another layer of trauma is that there's micro and macro aggressions that contribute to our trauma load. And so for our Black and Indigenous and people of color in America, this looks very different than it does for white people. The systemic racism and oppression that these populations wake up to every day contributes to their trauma load. In the LGBTQ population, they're also facing these micro and macro traumas. The neurodiverse population are often carrying micro and macro traumas because they're trying to exist inside of systems that weren't created with them in mind. Schools can be a part of this. So all of this is impacting their ability to find safety with us. So when our kids, whether we're clinicians or parents or teachers, when they walk into the room and their body is asking, am I safe? Am I safe with you? What informs their answer is also their entire history. So what we see is more than meets the eye. It's not just what's happening. It's not a snapshot right now at this moment in time. It's like an iceberg. We see the behavior of the current moment, but their entire trauma history is with them in the answer of, do I feel safe? And when we feel safe, that's when all the magic happens. So all the magic that Theresa is doing in her classrooms is inside of connection. And so it's so important to understand and so valuable to understand, what does connection look like? Is this child ready for connection? And if not, how can I help create this connection so that we can move forward with all these amazing ideas and plans that we have? And this is a big part of how Dr. Newsom is teaching these kids leadership. And if you are worried that these kids might not be feeling safe and they have all this trauma, and how are you supposed to help? Don't worry, we'll go over that later.
Well, that's a lot of information to take in.
I know.
And as we move forward, as Autumn has said, so I'm a classroom teacher, and being a classroom teacher, I need to be aware and be informed of when my students are in the green, right? Because if they're in the greens, like she said, they are so engaged. When they get to that blue, they're not that engaged. Their behaviors may be going in a different direction, and I've got to figure out how to bring them back. And if they get to the red, wow, I've lost them. They may be quiet, they may be shut down. Sometimes students know how to look like they're learning, and they're quiet and they're looking at you as a teacher, but they have checked out and they're probably on the ball field. They may be at gymnastics practice. They may be thinking about lunch, recess, all those other things, but they look like they're engaged. And this is why the connection of building leadership attributes and building students' self-efficacy is so important with this understanding the Polyvagal Theory and this being informed about trauma and how we can help students through that. So what I want to do is share the connection that Autumn has started with leadership, so it makes a little bit more sense, I hope, and it will be clearer for what we're doing, okay, what we're talking about. Okay. So I'm hoping the slide's going to move. Okay, maybe not. So let's go to the slide that talks about making the connection. That's the one. Okay. All right, so as Autumn was speaking, making the connection, and Our goal is to bridge the leadership attributes. Every child has leadership capacity, but not everyone develops their leadership capacity. It does need nurturing. It's just like teaching a math lesson. And when we teach a math lesson, we teach step by step by step, all the way to the outcome. We're looking for the sum. The same thing when we're teaching leadership, because leadership attributes are the connection to social emotional wellness for all of us. And that serves as the catalyst for positive change, for transformational growth. So as we're looking at the body wisdom, the concepts that Autumn has already talked about, I want you to look at the leadership attributes. Now you're probably wondering, okay, so why are we talking about leadership attributes? Because children, young people, students, and even as adults don't want to always talk about our mental health. It's not a popular conversation. When people think of mental health, sometimes it's in the negative, and we push back. I'm fine, everything is great. But we know that we have symptoms, we have emotions that are being challenged. And so I connect our social emotional wellness to leadership attributes. And as you can see them side by side, you're seeing that, hey, self-efficacy, I need to find my voice. And I can find my voice when I'm building relationships. Because when I have relationships, I feel safe, I can feel comfortable, I can let people know my needs. The awareness of my body and how it's changing when I'm going from green, the engagement, to the blue, where I'm checking out, I'm not feeling it, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I need to be self-aware as a leader. I need to know when I'm when I'm feeling uncomfortable, when I'm feeling, when I'm not feeling safe, and I'm feeling angry or something has set me off. So I need to be able to be a leader as far as showing my own self-leadership and self-awareness. Compassion and empathy, those are leadership words. They're attributes. And being able to understand without feeling sorry for someone. We also need to make sure people have permission. They're feeling that they have permission to check themselves, to be able to say, I'm not okay. And sometimes our students don't feel like they have permission. It's like, I got to keep going. And so we want them to be empowered so they can self-advocate. And then we want that sense of belonging. We all want a sense of belonging, that connection. And so when we have that, we can self-advocate, we can be empowered to move forward. So that's how we see body wisdom, the Polyvagal Theory, and leadership attributes coming together, because they're interconnected, but we are more willing to talk about leadership development, especially our young people, than to talk about our social emotional needs. So Autumn, as you were talking, you were saying that our history is impacting each of us. And I think I hope you can see the screen. I'm not sure my gallery.
Yes, no, I see you. It's great.
Okay, it's great.
It's
okay,
perfect. You got it.
So you talked about the micro and macro aggressions. You talked about us carrying all the history of our ancestors and whatever trauma they have gone through. And then of course, the trauma that we're going through today, especially for our children who are Black and brown, what they're going through. And I wanted to just tie some thoughts in. You know, as an educator, sometimes we do get focused on our curriculum. We have to, we have our pacing guides. We have so many things to cover. But we also know that if we are having trauma-like symptoms, we are facing issues, we're not going to be able to teach students without addressing their social emotional needs, especially as we are living in a COVID-19 pandemic. And then the second pandemic, or the first pandemic, is the racism that we're dealing with in this country that has bubbled over because of the death of George Floyd. We as educators and parents, because I'm still working with children, I'm a parent always will be, that when we address the traumas that they're going through, when we think about how do people have carried these burdens, these traumas for decades, for years, for centuries. We're talking about 400 years for Black people. How do we address that? And the connectedness, the relationships, the sense of belonging. Now, I understand that people say, well, you know, when I'm as a teacher or when I'm in a setting, I'm always welcoming. Hey, come on over. But the sense of belonging is not just for the moment of come on and sit by me, let's get comfortable. It's about making sure that I can say and share openly that I have a seat at the table and a voice, not just a seat, that I am being heard, that I have a voice that's that you might disagree with. And we're not comparing stories, because one of the things that we find as one of those aggressions is that people say, well, I have a story too. And we're not there to compare. We're not there to say your story is better than mine or yours is more traumatic than mine. It's just being able to be heard and knowing that it's safe to share, because there's a lot of fear when kids come into school. They know something has happened. They can't share openly for whatever reason. And if they don't feel that they can belong, that sense of belonging, that they're not being able to share openly, then they're going to become disengaged, as Autum has said. They're going to go into that blue stage. And it might not be anything that you have done, but that we didn't check their facial expressions. We didn't check their body language. We have a lot of students, there's no doubt. There's a lot of things that are going on in the classroom, no doubt. But as we build those relationships, we make those connections, we are saying that I know there's something that's a little off. I see you as a person, not just a number 24, number 25, or number 30 in a classroom. I also see you as an individual, and that everybody else might be moving along, but I can step away while they're moving forward to say, hey, let's do a real check-in. What's really going on? And I'm also informed enough to say, I might not be able to address it right now. I might need to turn it over to somebody else. Those are the things we're talking about. Autum, what else what else would you like to add?
Oh, well, I just want a time machine because I want to go back and be little and be a student in your classroom. Because this is it. I mean, everything that you're saying is just, it's magic. And honestly, because schools are trying to figure out what they're going to do about going back to school and e-learning, and I mean, there's a lot for schools to decide. But what you're saying is that if these children like aren't okay and they're not green and they're not connected and that's not happening, it really doesn't matter. Like the education, as far as the lesson plan, isn't there. But what you're saying about, I mean, all of these leadership skills, these are life skills. And that's when I took my son out of school. I mean, we weren't doing school at home because the school thing wasn't working. So I had to totally kind of blow it up and redesign it. And I was like, well, what really matters? And then what I figured out was it was life skills. And that's what you're talking about. And it's so cool
exactly.
that can happen inside of a classroom. I mean, you're doing this in a classroom.
And I love that you brought in the word life skills, because it truly is. And I know you're now thinking, okay, if I'm teaching life skills, how am I teaching standards? Well, when I build in a lesson, I start with an essential question. That essential question might be, how will leadership impact my learning? Well, using my attributes should impact my learning, right? Because I'm looking for the purpose of my learning. I'm looking on how will I learn it? Can I add something to my learning, which is empowerment? I get to own something because I know what the teacher wants, but I also encourage students to add. What can you change that's going to be relevant and make that connection in your own learning? So you are still going to be talking about standards. You're still going to teach content. You're still going to cover the language arts standards, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and math and so forth. You can also integrate the learning. so that it becomes larger than just a 45-minute lesson of focused on a story. Because I can bring in the history. I might be able to tie in some scientific information or inquiry thinking. Critical thinking should be a part of every lesson, as we know, because we don't want just rote learning. We want to make sure that students analyze, compare, contrast. So when they're looking at, we're adding the standards into our lessons, we're also looking at the leadership attributes of being compassionate to a group of people in a story that we need to talk about empathy. What is that? We also want to talk about our intent. What is the character's intent in the learning? But also, how do we see it? What's our perspective? Because perspective learning is also part of our standards. You're thinking about, well, how do I tie math and the Polyvagal Theory? Again, we need to be engaged in math. So it's not like we want students just to copy problems down. We want them to be engaged. There's movement activities, which gets back to our cultural piece. Because when we're sitting in class, everybody benefits when you're moving around and teaching lessons. The lesson could be about fractions. And so, students can use hand movements. They can hold up signs. You can have them get in sequential order, numerical order, divide and, stand by a partner, partners who are showing reduced fractions, because they have the numbers that have reduced fractions and you have the larger, the equivalent fraction. But there's movement in that, which gets back to, looking at our cultural needs, through a cultural lens of our students, that they're not just sitting there doing paper and pencil, or, for doing some remote learning. Again, that you're thinking, well, how can I do that? But we are creative. One of the beautiful things about bringing these two divergent ideas together is that it lends itself to creativity, to thinking outside the box. Anything else, Autumn?
Oh, well, I think that this is always relevant, but it's really relevant because,
I agree.
I mean, the end of the last semester was hard for kids, and it's just gotten more intense. And if we don't address this as a nation, and we have to do it in our schools. I mean, I'm not saying it's the only job, but they can't just quit being, emotional people when they walk into school. That's not how it is. We're complete people when we're at work, when we're at school. And
right.
I mean, you can't just like hang up that stuff and then walk into math. So, I mean, I feel like everything that we're saying is just so relevant for right now. And I guess I really believe in the power of teachers to do this work inside of their classrooms. And I believe that parents can do this work inside of their homes. And it's messy and it doesn't always go really well, but that's okay because we're all here anyways. And in Resmaa Menakem's book, he talks about clean pain versus dirty pain. So dirty pain is when we're not paying attention to things, but we're just sort of walking around mad, or, things aren't going well because it's in there anyways. And clean pain is when we just sort of turn our eyes to it, like you said, and you ask and you listen. And that can happen inside of a classroom. And he calls that clean pain, and it's hard to look at that stuff. Or if somebody's sharing and someone else is listening and you're building that empathy, I mean, inside of that is all of the leadership skills that that we're looking for. And that's the work that you're doing in your classrooms. And I feel like this is possible for everyone.
Exactly. When we think outside the box, we think about the needs of our kids, the social emotional wellness. I mean, it's hard to teach students who have disengaged. It's hard to teach students who have checked out. And if their behavior is impacting the learning environment, it's going to be hard to teach all kids. So putting these things together, the polyvagal theory, knowing about the informed trauma care, and developing students' leadership attributes. Because the important thing is that when we look at self-efficacy, I believe in myself. That's what self-efficacy is. I can. And then I also know with the supports, the relationships, the connections, you believe in me too. And when we have those things all in place, learning is going to just take off. And we've seen that with many students, and you as parents will say, yeah, when I am in the right zone, I am unstoppable. And that's what we want our students to be. We want them to be unstoppable. We want them to be able to have that personal growth. We want them to transform the negative into the positive. And so Autumn and I, we thank you for the time that we've had together. We're going to see you again and share some activities with you. We look forward to hearing any comments, your thoughts, having questions for us as we go forward in our next session. So thank you so much for being a part of our session, and we will see you again. Autumn?
That's it. Thank you so much. This was fun, Theresa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.